Welcome to Jolene's Books and Writers Talk, where stories begin long before the first page, and writing is more than words on a screen. I'm your host, Jolene McFadden, and each week I sit down with authors and publishing professionals to talk about craft, creativity, and the real life behind the books. These episodes are sponsored by Southern Dragon Publishing. Please take a few seconds and hit the like button, share this and other episodes, subscribe to our channel, and even leave a nice comment below. Let's begin.
My name is Lauren Gilbert. I grew up in the Midwest. I have a bachelor's of arts degree in English literature and a minor in art history. And I can't remember not knowing how to read. I've always been a total bookworm. I used to write books for my dolls and used my dolls more to act out the books I was reading than to play imaginative play. Everything I studied through high school and college was literature, artwork, and all of my relatives were readers, which is, I think, a huge advantage. And my mother and grandmother and great aunts introduced me to English literature when I was in grade school. So I've always had a fascination for English history and the Regency era in particular, because especially now, it reminds me so much of our own time. You had people being stripped of their employment because of new technology, forced to move to different cities and strange parts of the country for hopefully new work. You had the glittering social life for the 1% at the top where all the power and money was located, and then the rest of the people. At the same time, so many of the advances of the Industrial Revolution that is largely considered to be Victorian era actually had their roots in the Regency period. The beginnings of railroad, for example. There was a train that initially started just giving rides in parks, and that grew. I think it's a period that, of course, with the popularity of Jane Austen and Bridgerton and things, I think it's a period that speaks to a lot of people because, on one hand, you have the pretty clothes and the romance and the fairy tale, but then as you read more about it, you see some of the parallels.
All righty. So, your last book you published is?
A Rational Attachment. It is a romantic historical novel. I write character-driven novels that feature women, and my heroines are usually women who are coming into themselves and realizing what their gifts are and what their interests are. I'm very acutely aware of the differences in the social structure, and I place this within the confines of the time. I don't write 21st century heroines galloping around town in a Regency gown. I try to write believable Regency heroines who are more than just the social hostess and decorative ornament in the drawing room.
Times change, and we all have different tastes, but it's cyclical. And Bridgerton, I think, has helped bring historical romances back into vogue, as it were. Hopefully, it makes it a little bit more popular. So, how do you do your research? I'm always fascinating to know the different resources people utilize these days.
I do a lot of work in period newspapers. I have a subscription to the British Newspaper Archive
Oh, nice.
and have dipped into them from the late 1700s and into the Victorian era. I also use a lot of online material from the genealogical sites, how to find marriage records, what does it look like when somebody runs off to Gretna and then comes back and gets married quietly by the conventional means? And I also like to go into the British National Archives because a lot of documents, like wills, are actually available online. For the book I'm working on, I've actually had to order a number of documents from them. The handwriting is a little intimidating.
Oh, yeah.
It's all fascinating. And then there are so many collections of letters, memoirs, and diaries of contemporary persons to read that give you the idea of how people were thinking, what they looked at. For example, one of the big differences is it's not unusual for close friends during the Regency era to talk very frankly about their affection for each other and to refer to each other as dear one and so forth, like you would a family relative. Jane Austen's letters are a wonderful source because until you've read the letters, it's easy to miss some of the sharp ends of her humor. But when you read her letters, you realize there's a lot of snark here. And she was a normal person. So it can't have all been sweetness and light and good manners and all of that that we assume. So I think that all helps to give an edge to a character that keeps them from sinking into just a sweet little miss or a lovely elderly dowager.
Well, that is what makes it readable. And in good fiction and a good story is they have to have flaws. And I know
Yes, they do.
during the 50s and the 60s, everybody was all smiling and nice to each other. That's not real life.
No, and it isn't the way it was.
So, yes, I like that. The personal letters is really something. That's one good thing I think will come out of AI is teaching them how to read these old documents and they can be scanned. Of course, they'll need human intervention for a while till they read
Yeah,
first, but their eyes are much better than ours.
there's a lot of potential for it to be an extremely useful tool on many levels, but they do really need to prevent it from editing on its own. It needs a watchful guardian.
They've got a lot of stuff built in. That's one of the research things that I'm doing in tech since the 80s. I put my computers together. I've done some programming and I built my own websites. So anything new, I always read up and teach myself how to do it. Some of the documentation that the volunteers who created this and put it out in the world, there's a certain backbone to it. Asimov's three laws that are built in, there's a lot of restrictions in there. I was remarking to my fellow writers, AI does not do well for murder mystery writers because we ask too many questions about what happens to the body, if you stab it, and how long does poison work. It doesn't distinguish between research for books and research for murder. So they
Yes,
say, I'm
yeah.
sorry, I can't tell you. That's not part of my programming.
I can
There's
understand that.
there's some stuff built in they're trying to maintain so long as greedy corporations don't get in there and just open it all up, which is what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to take away all the safeguards, which I
Oh,
think is
yeah.
a masculine thing.
The edge.
Yeah. I say go out into space and y'all figure that out by yourself so you can't hurt nobody.
I like that.
But what are you currently working on?
I do have notes going for a couple more historical novels, but my main emphasis right now is actually a nonfiction book
Oh,
about seven women during the Regency era. It was originally thought up as one book, but I'm finding a lot more material than I think was expected. And I'm weighing the option of doing it in two because So far, I've got painfully rough drafts written on two sections, and one of them is 50,000 words and the other is 30.
Mm.
And given that the limit on words that was discussed was like 150,000 words, and I've got 7 of these, I don't think it's going to really work in one volume.
Mm.
But they're women of power. The names are famous names, patronesses of Almack's. 4 of them have almost nothing written about them. The other 3, there is published material, which is wonderful. And I had the opportunity to do a lot of research on one of them at the London Metropolitan Archives and the Royal Bank of Scotland archives. They're very different from the way they're portrayed in most novels. Their names pop up and they're like a cardboard cutout society hostess, and either she's snobby and mean or she's sweet and warm, but it's the cloning kind of thing where they're only viewed through that lens. And they are so much more interesting than that.
I have a tendency, this is just my opinion, but it's been my experience in 60 years, that literature was mostly written by men, and they have a tendency not to want to tell the truth about women, to give the full account. Granted, they don't want to give all the foibles for Henry VIII either, except for to be scandalous, but they vanilla us over the years and continue to do that and discount us as people. And
Yes.
so it's good that we have more women writers being recognized. And from the sounds of it, you have a contract, a publisher.
We have temporarily shelved that, I hope temporarily, because of the amount of time involved. They wanted 7 women, well documented, within a year. I'm not that fast that I can do that level of research on 7 people. And quite frankly, I don't have a budget for hiring researchers
Right.
to do it. We went separate ways, and my editor let me know that at a point I have something to submit, I should submit it. But I'm hoping there will be room for it. And of course, today we live in a time when there are more than one publisher of this kind of fiction and nonfiction, and self publishing is always an option,
Yes. It actually,
even with nonfiction. So I'm plugging along with it, and it'll be out there one way or another.
okay. Are you having to travel to England and Scotland, or is everything being done online?
Most of it is done online. I was fortunate enough to be able to do the 2 archives that I did on a trip,
Mm.
but it's not something I can do on a frequent or regular basis because, again, I'm just a person, so I don't have an unlimited budget for travel and fees and all that stuff. I will say that COVID did not hurt me the way it did so many people. When we had the lockdown, one of the things that happened was multiple archives had people coming in and digitizing, and they put stuff online and it was free because people couldn't come in to see it. And it kept their people working for the stuff that there was a charge for. I guess it kept enough income coming in to manage it. And I gleaned a lot of information for low or no cost during that 2-year period that might have been much harder for me to come by.
Yeah. I know the British Museum digitized millions of photographs and documents. All you had to do was just sign up. They didn't even
Oh,
charge,
yeah.
which I thought was great. I know the Smithsonian has been trying very hard to get as much as they can scanned in as quickly as possible. And because of the latest political climate, the Library of Congress has been really trying to scan all their stuff in as much as possible.
Oh,
Uh,
I'm sure.
so, anyway, book banning and burning books and taking libraries apart, destroying our history is ridiculous.
I totally agree.
Are you considered a plotter or a pantser? Do you have to have an outline? Let's go with your
Well,
books first.
actually, I'm both. I started out primarily as a pantser, and I usually do have a whole bunch of notes where I've basically got the storyline plotted out. But I took an online webinar with a trainer who used a specific format where you go through and you outline everything about your protagonist and everything about your antagonist. And then you've got the beginning, the middle, and the end. And I take my mess and I put it into that format. It pretty much writes itself. It is one of the best things since sliced bread for me. Another thing I use is ProWritingAid. It's not 100% perfect,
Right.
but for the most part, it catches if I've slipped on spelling, because I try to use British spelling. And some of it comes very naturally to me and some doesn't. And there are words like block, which was in use in the Regency era, but it applied primarily to America, but it was known in England. So I'm suspecting there were people who referred to a section of a square possibly as a block, but it catches a lot of that. But one of my favorite things about it is I can also run a plagiarism scan, because one of the risks of being an avid reader is there are authors whose work you really love, and
Right.
there can be phrases and sentences that stick in your head, and you don't even know that you've put it in there willy-nilly, and that way I can catch it before I make a mistake.
Mm.
I use that on my blogs too when I'm writing a blog, because you're using a lot of online sources and other things, and you want to make sure you properly credit stuff.
Right.
So it tells me if I've missed a footnote, which is good.
That's hard for me. Remembering to put in citations and footnotes when I'm doing the research, because you gather all this stuff up and you're reading through it and you're making notes. Do you have a program that helps you keep track of your notations?
I use a spreadsheet.
Well,
On these people that I have virtually no documentation on, as I'm reading newspaper, I have these spreadsheets. They have different sections, so I don't have to try to put all of it on one. And I break it down into 5-year periods. And everything I see about where they are, what they're doing, are they sick, that kind of stuff, I put it in date order with the sources, the name of the newspaper, the date, the page, where it was published, anything I want to use as a footnote. If it's a diary entry, which book I found it in, whose diary, whose letter. And that way I've got them organized. So as I'm writing, since I'm going to be using that information for the actual body, I can put the footnote in right away when it's important. Since some of this isn't annotated anywhere, I'm footnoting an awful lot of stuff just so people can see where I found it. It was in a memoir. Yes, it was in a newspaper, so that I didn't just make it up. Because when you're working on something historical where there are so few things about the person directly, when there's no biography, whether it's a blog or whatever, you need to know some nitty gritty details. For example, on one of my ladies, I found out she had several children, and right in the middle, there was a child. And some sources gave one name for this child, some sources gave other names for this child. And it was like she was mentioned once and never mentioned again. And I was Googling, and I actually found her christening record. and it had both of her parents' names on it, so I could be sure it was the right one. It was the right time frame. It was the right sex. And once I had the correct name, I was able to find that she died at the age of 14 and where she was buried. I could fill in some gaps about some things.
I like to use the genealogy records on familysearch.org because one, it's free. They've been working for years and years to get
Oh,
all
yeah.
digitized, and they're still working on the 1950 census to get it indexed so it can be searchable. They have it on there that you can view it. I have a subscription to newspapers.com.
Uh-huh.
So luckily, when I find stuff about, I print it from the clip and it gives me the name of the newspaper and the page and all that. So I do have that to make my footnotes in. And it's amazing to me how much information is in those newspapers.
Yep.
I was researching a hotel, a historical hotel that just renovated in Lake City called the Blanche. And from
Hmm.
1902, when it first opened, until 1955, it was the gateway.
Yeah.
For people to come to Florida, they'd have to go through Lake City or they'd have to go through Jacksonville. And then they went further south. So the hotel was the center of attention and attraction. It's been a hospital, it's been a lot of different things. And the newspaper was microfilmed by University of Florida. So I had to go to the
Oh, I
library.
remember microfilm. I've worked with microfilm, and boy, is it a mess.
It is because it was during the 70s. They got a grant in the 70s and
Mhm.
they put those newspapers in those big hardback books, so they had to be scanned and they had to be flattened, and some they fall apart. And they missed a whole year, which we found in the newspaper office when they were renovating. They found that volume, but it's never been scanned in. I was reading through, each newspaper, and it would say so and so is having a party and she's turning 12, and this is what the dinner is,
Yeah.
this is how they dress, and of course, all the wedding, who was at the wedding, what they ate, what the bride wore, what the bridesmaids wore, where they were going, and which family member was staying with which
Oh,
house.
yeah.
And
There's an amazing amount of data in a newspaper article about a party. When it comes to especially the lists of guests, it can be iffy. I've had some say that it was one person and that person couldn't have been there because they were somewhere else and there was no record they'd come back. You can't always assume everything is right, but the overall, especially if you're looking for information and the person is the host or the hostess, that's wonderful. These Regency era descriptions of parties talks about what rooms in the house were opened and how they were decorated. As you mentioned, the food that they served. A few of them give descriptions by name, which ladies were wearing what, and sometimes even the men, especially when it's a masquerade. They get into a lot of detail with that.
it was quite lovely to find that kind of stuff out. Then they just stopped doing it around, I don't know, right after World War I. I think it was less and less. They were still saying so and so has gone to Alabama for the summer to be
Mm.
on the lake or at the shore, or is going down to the Miami or Cuba for vacation, or up in the mountains where it's cooler and that sort of stuff. That's all fascinating.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. What can I say?
And nowadays you can't do that. Actually, with social media, we're doing the same thing again.
We're just doing it ourselves
We're
most
doing
of the
it
time.
in pictures, text, and videos. So it's more rich and more than likely is forever once it gets on the
And
internet.
unfortunately, I think that's true. You've got to be careful about what you post.
Yep, yep. Because all the stuff we got away with in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, kids
No,
wouldn't get
no.
away with it no more.
You wouldn't get away with it from the standpoint of keeping it a secret.
No, your family always knew, but nobody discussed it outside the family group or shared it with the
Yeah.
neighbors. In Jacksonville, anyway, we were pretty family centric, even though we lived with neighbors
Hmm.
and had kids running in and out all the time and all that. So, as a writer, what advice would you give somebody new into the historical fiction realm? What would be your top three pieces of advice? Say, try to do this to get you started.
Read all the history of the period you're interested in that you can get your hands on. One of the things I like to do is I like to look for histories or biographies that were written as close to the time
Oh,
as possible. I had a wonderful conversation with a lovely man who wants to write and he didn't know how to start. He wanted to write in a completely different genre. And I said, the best thing I can tell you to do is when you have an idea, write it down. Get a notebook and write it down because you will not remember it.
yes.
As you do this, at whatever point you decide you want to start, you will have references to all these things you've thought of and things to begin with. Because sometimes getting that first paragraph or first chapter out is the hardest part. And the third thing is to remember it's not a competition. And somebody can not like your book. It doesn't mean it's a bad book. It means that person didn't like it. Somebody else will. Don't be afraid to write what you want to write. There are readers for every book, and there are books for every reader. You may have to look for them for a while, but they're out there.
All righty. Have you spent any time on Gutenberg.org or archive.org? I think it is.
I use them to go in and see if a book is something that will be useful to me when I'm looking for research material. I work on a desktop.
Mm.
That's what I'm comfortable with. I find the keyboards on most laptops are too constraining. I like a bigger keyboard. It's just my personal preference, and I don't like to read on it. So, what I will frequently do is go online and see if I can find it in an ebook. And I know Google Books frequently has ebooks available. And I found a surprising number of them on Amazon and even in Walmart. If I can't find it in an ebook, and frankly, trying to footnote from an ebook is very hard because the page numbers don't always show up. And depending on your font size, if there are page numbers or location numbers, they'll change if you change the font size. So to try to make a footnote from that is difficult. But I'll go online and I'll find them through a variety of used book sources like Abe Books. That's one of my personal favorites. And I found them on eBay, Amazon, and any place that sells used books. You can find old copies out there, and I'll order them that way. So it's less expensive. Interlibrary loan here is difficult because of different fees, and some libraries won't loan if you're outside of a certain number of miles from their facility. Frankly, I used to use it a lot, but I've pretty much quit because it's just gotten too cumbersome.
Yes, it is difficult, and they're trying to break it up more so there's not any cooperativeness.
Yeah.
There used to be
Yeah.
every book that's ever been published is at the Library of Congress, but you have to go to the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
So
And
you
it's not dropping in distance for me.
even hopping on board the Amtrak and spending the day up there, it's out of the way, which that's one of my goals. One day I want to go and spend the day at
Yes, I would love to do that.
I'd probably get lost or try to sneak into the restricted section.
Of course.
See if I could find those books from the Knights Templar or whatever.
Yep. Who knows what could be hidden behind a door in that building?
Maybe we should try to get a hold of the head librarian that Trump fired. Maybe she'll be willing to share some secrets.
That's a thought. Now, that would be an interview.
That would be a good interview. So, last question. I usually ask this of everybody because it's fun and you never know what you're going to get. But it's an off the cuff kind of thing. It doesn't really have anything to do with writing. If you had a chance to spend an evening with two different people at different times, anytime through history, alive or dead, and just be able to have them at your dinner table so you can talk to them, which two
Hmm.
people would it be and why?
I could do three pretty easily.
Okay.
Either Jane Austen or her sister.
Okay.
I would prefer Jane Austen because I admire her writing and would like to pick her brain about that. I also enjoy her rather acerbic wit and observations, and I find that entertaining. The Duke of Wellington,
Okay.
and I would like to ask him why, when he came back from India and proposed to Kitty Pakenham again, why he did that. Because he'd asked before, been turned away by her father. She was young and pretty and cute and all that good stuff when he first proposed. And when he came back, she had been ill, had been worn down. The only comment about her I can find is how she'd grown damned ugly. And their marriage was not a happy one. She was apparently crazy about him, but he was far from crazy about her. Why would you do that? Especially given he was a man of numerous opportunities and he was capable of friendships with a number of women. And the third one that I would really like to talk to is Oscar Wilde
Yeah. He would be interesting.
because I like his writing. The Portrait of Dorian Gray is one of the most evocative and compelling stories.
Mhm.
And he also has a great deal of wit that I enjoy.
Those are good choices, Miss Lauren. Thank you so much for being on my show. And I hope you had a good time.
I did. And I
And
thank you for having me, Miss Jolene.
you've been listening to Jolene's Books and Writers Talk. You'll find links to my guests, their books, and additional resources in the show notes. If this conversation inspired you, follow or subscribe wherever you listen. And join me again next week for another journey into the world of writing.